suspect may be driving a white or light-colored Ford Bronco.
Los Angeles, a city glowing with camera flashes, celebrity parties, and endless headlines. A city where fame could make someone untouchable. And on one warm summer night in 1994, everything changed. Because just after midnight, on a quiet street lined with expensive homes and swaying trees, 2 people were found murdered outside a condominium. The scene was horrifying. Blood on the walkway, a trail of evidence stretching into the darkness, and neighbors waking up to flashing lights that would soon attract something even larger: the entire world. At first, police believed it would be straightforward: a violent crime, a suspect, an arrest. But they had no idea they were stepping into a story that would divide a nation. Because the man they focused on wasn't unknown. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was admired, celebrated, a football legend, a movie star, a familiar face on television screens across America. To millions, he represented success, charisma, and fame at its highest level. But behind the cameras, behind the smiles, something darker was lingering beneath the surface. Something nobody wanted to fully confront. Or maybe something people refused to believe. And within hours, the investigation would explode into a media storm unlike anything the country had ever seen. Helicopters would follow a slow-moving white Ford Bronco across Los Angeles highways. Television networks would interrupt regular programming. Families would stop what they were doing and stare at their screens. More than 90 million people would watch the chase unfold live, not knowing they were witnessing the beginning of a case that would reshape American culture forever. Because this wasn't just about murder anymore. It became a battle over celebrity, race, police corruption, power, justice, and truth itself. Then came the trial. Months of testimony, forensic experts, detectives, lawyers performing like actors before a global audience, DNA evidence that seemed impossible to ignore, a courtroom filled with tension every single day. And yet, after everything, after the blood evidence, after the gloves, after the witnesses, one question still refuses to disappear. How did he walk free? Was the jury protecting an innocent man? Or did one of the most famous people in America escape justice in front of the entire world? Because even today, decades later, people still argue over what really happened that night. And the deeper you go into this case, the stranger it becomes. June 12th, 1994, Los Angeles, California. A quiet Sunday night in Brentwood. Luxury homes stood behind iron gates. Streetlights lit empty sidewalks. And no one knew that before sunrise, the neighborhood would become the center of one of America's most infamous murder cases. Just after midnight, outside a condo on South Bundy Drive, 2 bodies were found. 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson and 25-year-old Ron Goldman. The attack was brutal. Blood covered the walkway and concrete outside the home. Nicole suffered multiple stab wounds. Ron appeared to have fought desperately for his life. Detectives immediately sensed this wasn't random. What disturbed investigators most was the silence. Despite the violence, neighbors reported hearing almost nothing. No clear screams. No witnesses identifying the killer. At first, police explored every possibility. robbery, an intruder, personal revenge. But the crime scene kept pointing them toward one name: O.J. Simpson. To the public, he was untouchable, an NFL legend, actor, celebrity known across America. But to Nicole, he was her ex-husband. And behind their public image was a history filled with arguments, jealousy, police reports, and allegations of domestic violence. Suddenly, detectives weren't looking at a random homicide anymore. They were asking a chilling question. What if the danger had been close to Nicole all along? Then came evidence investigators believed connected directly to O.J. himself. A bloody glove, footprints, drops of blood. But almost immediately, problems appeared. Mistakes, inconsistencies, questions surrounding the investigation. Questions the defense would later use to challenge everything. Because this case quickly became bigger than murder alone. It became a storm of fame, race, media obsession, and a justice system watched by the entire world. And soon, millions of people were asking the same question. If the evidence pointed in one direction, why did the truth feel so uncertain? Before the headlines, before the helicopters, before the courtroom cameras and nonstop media coverage, there were real people at the center of this story. People whose lives were already moving toward a collision nobody fully recognized in time. At the heart of it all was Nicole Brown Simpson. To friends and family, Nicole was warm, social, and deeply devoted to her children. She had met O.J. Simpson years earlier while working as a waitress in Beverly Hills. At the time, O.J. was already famous, confident, magnetic. The kind of celebrity who could command attention the moment he entered a room. Their relationship moved quickly, and from the outside, their life appeared glamorous. Luxury homes, public appearances, a picture-perfect celebrity marriage broadcast across magazines and television screens. But behind closed doors, the reality was far more complicated. Over the years, friends would later describe emotional arguments, controlling behavior, and moments that left Nicole visibly shaken. Police had reportedly been called to the home multiple times during the marriage. On one occasion, records showed Nicole hiding in bushes while pleading for help during a 911 call. Those details stayed largely hidden from the public at the time, because in the world of celebrity, appearances often mattered more than truth. Eventually, Nicole and O.J. divorced, but according to people close to her, the separation did not fully end the tension between them. Friends later claimed Nicole had become increasingly cautious in the months leading up to her death. Some said she seemed nervous. Others believed she was trying to quietly rebuild her life while distancing herself from the chaos of the past. And then there was Ron Goldman, 25 years old, young, energetic, known by friends as kind-hearted and dependable. Ron worked at a restaurant in Brentwood and dreamed of bigger opportunities ahead. Unlike the others connected to this case, Ron was not famous. He wasn't surrounded by controversy, and investigators found no evidence suggesting he lived a dangerous life or had known enemies, which made his presence at Nicole's home that night even more tragic. According to investigators, Ron had simply stopped by to return a pair of glasses accidentally left behind at the restaurant earlier that evening. A small favor, a routine moment, one decision that would place him directly into the path of violence. And then there was O.J. Simpson. To millions of Americans, he represented success itself. A football legend who had shattered records in the NFL.
an actor and broadcaster whose smile made him instantly recognizable. He moved comfortably through elite social circles. Celebrities admired him. Brands trusted him. Fans adored him. He seemed untouchable. But as investigators started looking closer after the murders, another image slowly emerged. An image far different from the polished public persona seen on television. Stories of explosive
jealousy, anger, fear. Details that had existed quietly for years, but now carried terrifying new significance. Still, even with those allegations, nobody was prepared for what would happen next. Because on the night of June 12th, 1994, everything changed. Not just for the families involved, not just for Los Angeles, but for America itself. Within hours, police would begin gathering evidence that appeared to point directly toward one man. And once that process began, there was no turning back. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, detectives were... The crime scene on South Bundy Drive was chaotic. Investigators moved carefully across blood-stained concrete, photographing every detail, every footprint, every fiber, every drop of blood. Because whoever committed these murders had left behind more evidence than anyone expected. And almost immediately, that evidence appeared to point toward one person: O.J. Simpson. Detectives quickly began reconstructing the final hours before the killings. Witnesses described seeing Nicole earlier that evening, attending her daughter's dance recital. Family members later gathered for dinner at a nearby restaurant. Ron Goldman was working at Mezzaluna restaurant that night, before reportedly agreeing to return a pair of glasses left behind by Nicole's mother. By all appearances, it was an ordinary evening. Until it suddenly wasn't. Investigators now focused on a narrow window of time. Somewhere between late evening and just after 10 p.m., something violent unfolded outside Nicole's home. And according to prosecutors, the timeline surrounding O.J. Simpson's movements that night became increasingly difficult to ignore. Then came the physical evidence. Near the crime scene, investigators discovered a bloody glove, dark-colored, left-handed. Later, another glove, appearing to match the first, would reportedly be found at Simpson's estate on Rockingham Avenue. That discovery immediately raised alarms. But it was only the beginning. Detectives also documented what appeared to be blood drops leading away from the scene. Blood found inside Simpson's vehicle. Blood found at his home. And according to forensic testing conducted later, DNA evidence appeared to connect Simpson, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ron Goldman across multiple locations tied to the investigation. At first glance, the case looked devastating. Some investigators believed they were building an overwhelming prosecution. But outside the investigation, pressure was mounting fast. Because by now, the media had caught on, and America was watching. Fast-paced news montage sounds, TV static, helicopter blades. Then, on June 17th, 1994, the entire case took a surreal turn. O.J. Simpson was expected to surrender to police. Instead, he disappeared. Suddenly, alerts interrupted television broadcasts across the country. Viewers watched live footage of a white Ford Bronco moving slowly across Los Angeles freeways. Inside the vehicle, O.J. Simpson sat in the passenger seat, while longtime friend Al Cowlings drove. Police followed from a distance. Helicopters hovered overhead. Crowds gathered on overpasses, waving signs and staring down at the unfolding pursuit. It did not look like a normal police chase. There were no speeding patrol cars, no dangerous swerves. Just a silent procession crawling through the city beneath the eyes of millions. And according to reports coming from inside the vehicle,
Simpson allegedly had a gun pointed at himself. The atmosphere across the country shifted instantly. People stopped what they were doing to watch. Restaurants rolled televisions into dining rooms. Families sat frozen in their living rooms. Even the NBA Finals broadcast was interrupted. An estimated 95 million viewers watched the chase live. For many, it no longer felt like reality. It felt like America itself had become trapped inside a televised drama
Nobody could escape. Eventually, the Bronco reached Simpson's estate. Hours after the chase began, he surrendered peacefully. And finally, the man once celebrated as one of America's greatest sports heroes was arrested for murder. But despite the dramatic arrest, investigators knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because evidence alone does not guarantee conviction. And as prosecutors prepared their case, Simpson assembled a legal team unlike anything the public had ever seen. High-profile attorneys, expert consultants, relentless strategists. A defense team that would soon become known around the world as the Dream Team. By the time the trial began, the case had already consumed America. But prosecutors believed they still had one major advantage: the evidence. Blood evidence linking O.J. Simpson to the crime scene. DNA findings that investigators claimed were nearly impossible to explain away. Matching gloves, footprints, fibers, cuts on Simpson's hand shortly after the murders. To the prosecution, the case seemed powerful, direct, convincing. But then, the defense struck back, and everything changed. O.J. Simpson's legal team was unlike anything most Americans had ever seen assembled in a courtroom. High-profile attorneys, experienced litigators, experts trained not only to defend a client, but to control perception itself. Soon, the media gave them a nickname that would follow the trial forever: the Dream Team. And from the very beginning, their strategy was not simply to argue innocence. It was to dismantle trust in the investigation itself. Every mistake made by detectives became ammunition. Every inconsistency became a weapon. Every unanswered question became an opportunity. The defense argued that investigators mishandled evidence. They questioned how blood samples were collected, how crime scenes were secured, how evidence moved between locations. And slowly, they began planting a dangerous idea into the minds of jurors. What if the investigation had been compromised from the start? Then, the defense focused attention on something even more explosive: the Los Angeles Police Department itself. At the time, tensions between many black communities and LAPD were already deep. The 1991 beating of Rodney King and the riots that followed still haunted Los Angeles. Distrust toward law enforcement remained intense, and the defense understood that context could reshape how jurors viewed the entire case. Then came Detective Mark Furman, one of the officers involved in discovering key evidence. At first, prosecutors believed Furman would strengthen their case. Instead, he became one of its greatest vulnerabilities. Audio recordings surfaced containing racist language allegedly spoken by Furman years earlier. The defense seized on it immediately. If Furman had lied under oath, what else could he have lied about? Could evidence have been manipulated? Could the investigation itself have been biased? Suddenly, the trial was no longer just about murder. It became a battle over race, police credibility, and whether the justice system itself could be trusted. And then came the moment that changed everything. The glove demonstration. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors asked O.J. Simpson to try on the gloves connected to the murders. The entire nation watched closely. Cameras zoomed in. Jurors leaned forward. The courtroom fell silent. Simpson slowly pulled at the gloves, struggling to fit them onto his hands. And in that moment, the prosecution's confidence appeared to collapse in real time. The gloves looked tight, awkward, uncomfortable, almost too small.
Is that the right-hand glove?
The defense reacted instantly. For them, this was the moment they had been waiting for. Defense attorney Johnny Cochran delivered the line that would echo across television screens forever. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. It was simple, memorable, devastatingly effective. But prosecutors pushed back hard. They argued the gloves had been soaked in blood, frozen, handled repeatedly over months of testing.
All right.
They claimed the material may have shrunk. They also pointed out that Simpson appeared to be wearing protective latex gloves underneath during the demonstration. To prosecutors, the evidence still pointed clearly toward guilt. But inside the courtroom, certainty was beginning to crack. Because jurors were no longer looking only at forensic science. They were looking at confusion, contradictions, possibilities, and doubt. The defense had managed to transform the trial itself into a question mark. And the deeper the trial went, the more divided the country became. Some believed the evidence was overwhelming. Others believed the investigation had been deeply flawed from the beginning. Television debates exploded every night. Families argued in living rooms. Co-workers debated in offices. America was splitting into two completely different interpretations of the same case. And still, the biggest shock had not yet arrived. As the months passed, the trial stopped feeling like a normal criminal case. It became something larger. A national obsession unfolding live on television every single day. Courtroom testimony dominated headlines. News anchors analyzed every expression, every pause, every objection. Millions of people followed the proceedings as though they were watching a serialized drama. But unlike television fiction, this story involved real deaths, real families, and consequences that would last forever. Inside the courtroom, pressure intensified. Witnesses were cross-examined relentlessly. Forensic experts debated DNA evidence in exhausting detail. The prosecution insisted the science was undeniable. Blood samples collected from multiple locations appeared to connect Simpson directly to the crime scene. To prosecutors, the physical evidence formed a clear chain. But the defense focused less on disproving every detail and more on weakening confidence altogether. They reminded jurors repeatedly about contaminated evidence procedures, questionable police handling, conflicting timelines, and the credibility issues surrounding Detective Furman. The strategy was working. Because in criminal court, the burden is not proving someone might be guilty. It is proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And slowly, that certainty began slipping away. Outside the courthouse, the divide across America grew sharper. For some observers, the prosecution's evidence still looked overwhelming. For others, the trial symbolized years of distrust toward law enforcement and unequal treatment within the justice system. The case had evolved far beyond the murders themselves. It had become emotional, political, cultural, deeply personal. And every side believed they were watching a completely different truth unfold. Meanwhile, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman risked becoming overshadowed by the spectacle surrounding the trial. Two victims, increasingly buried beneath arguments, media frenzy,
and celebrity attention. And after nearly a year of testimony, cross-examinations, and non-stop public scrutiny, everything was now in the hands of the jury. The nation waited. Television stations prepared for history. Schools paused classes. Offices gathered employees around TVs. People stood silently inside stores and restaurants, watching live broadcasts. Because everyone understood one thing. The verdict
would change America, no matter what happened. And on October 3rd, 1995, the world held its breath. October 3rd, 1995. After months of testimony, after hundreds of hours of evidence, after a trial that had consumed the attention of an entire nation, the jury finally returned to the courtroom. The atmosphere was suffocating. Every camera in the room was fixed on the jury box. Every reporter held their breath. Every person watching live television across the country waited in silence. Because everyone understood whatever was about to be said would be remembered forever. The clerk began to read the verdict, one count at a time. And then came the words that would fracture public opinion instantly. Not guilty. For a brief moment, there was no visible reaction. Just stillness, as if the entire courtroom could not process what had just been heard. Then, everything broke at once. Inside the courtroom, emotions erupted. Some wept in relief. Others sat frozen in disbelief. Family members of the victims struggled to comprehend what they were hearing. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was even more explosive. Crowds gathered instantly around television screens across America. Some celebrated. Some shouted in anger. Some simply stood in silence, unable to reconcile the outcome. Because in that single moment, the same verdict was being interpreted in two completely different realities. To one side, it was justice, a system that had done its job. To the other, it was failure, a system that had broken under pressure. News stations cut live coverage between cities. Talk shows immediately went on air. Experts, commentators, and everyday citizens all tried to make sense of what had just happened. But no explanation felt complete. No reaction felt sufficient. And no outcome felt like closure. Music slowly fades in, somber. Because even though the trial had ended, something deeper remained unresolved. The questions did not disappear. They multiplied. Even today, this case remains one of the most debated in modern history. A story still discussed in documentaries, classrooms, and living rooms around the world. Because the verdict answered one question, but left many others untouched. Was justice truly served? Or was it a failure of evidence collection, shaped by doubt and procedural mistakes? Or was it something deeper? A breakdown of trust between a community and the institutions meant to protect it. And somewhere within all of that lies the most haunting possibility of all. That something critical, something small, something overlooked in the chaos of investigation and trial may have changed everything forever. Because in the end, the trial ended in a verdict. But the story never truly ended. The questions remain. The debates continue.
and the truth,
depending on who you ask, still feels incomplete. And so, the final question remains. Not for the courtroom, not for the jury, but for everyone still watching this story decades later.